Hey guys, and welcome back to Texas History for Kids, episode number 50. I cannot believe we are already on episode number 50. I'm your host, Michelle Gallegos. Today's episode is called Election Day. So, the biggest headlines of our news in recent days has been, it's all over TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, you name it. You've listened to an ad or two from politicians everywhere trying to sell you on voting for them. So the presidential election 2024 has already been done. By the time this podcast airs, it will have already happened for at least a week. But anyway, adults all over America are standing in long lines just waiting to get their little I voted sticker to proudly post on social media. All kidding aside, this is one of the most important days of the year, Election Day. This is the only day in history where you can honestly say your voice is your vote. Why do we vote? Why is it on a Tuesday? And who decided all of this in the first place? Stay tuned because I've got some interesting information coming your way. Just imagine for a second that you've never had a say in anything that was important around you. No choice on school rules, what parks get built, or even what your town looks like. Does that sound familiar? Well, democracy means that the people decide. And that's what we have elections for. We are a democratic government, and we get to choose our leaders in America. Whether it's the president, the governor, the mayor, the chief of police, or even your next high school prom king and queen, you get to vote for the candidate that you believe in most. But how did people decide to vote and hold these elections? And why on a Tuesday? Hold on, I'm getting there, guys. The very first president of the United States was George Washington. And he was elected in 1788, although he didn't take office until 1789. Let's travel back to 1845, when most people lived on farms and traveled by horse and wagon. November was after harvest season, but before the harsh winter weather, making it easier to travel in November. Sunday was a day of rest, so Monday was for traveling. Wednesdays were common market days, so Tuesday ensured farmers could both vote and still get to market without any conflicts. So, with Tuesday being the only available day they could vote, there you have it. We now vote on Tuesdays. And it's been like that for nearly 200 years or so. But who came up with that idea? Well, the U.S. Congress, of course. They chose Tuesday as a compromise, and it became our country's tradition. I bet you thought there was a lot more legal reason than that, right? Nope, that's it. But wait, did everyone get to vote back then? Early voting restrictions of the past restricted half of the population from voting. In the 1800s, voting restrictions in the United States included several elements. Property ownership. Early on, voters were often required to own property or pay a certain amount of taxes to qualify to vote. Race. Before the 15th Amendment in 1870, Black Americans were generally not allowed to vote, especially in the southern states like Texas. Gender. Women were not permitted to vote until the 19th Amendment in 1920. That's just over 100 years ago, folks. Also, Native Americans were not considered citizens and weren't allowed to vote until the Indian Citizenship Act of 1924, exactly 100 years ago this year. Some states even had laws that limited voting to Christians only. Allowing this restriction became less common over time, though. These restrictions meant that most voters were white, land-owning men. Expanding voting rights was a gradual process throughout the 19th 20th centuries. Imagine this scenario. There's an upcoming vote at school, and you get to choose the theme for the end of the year dance. Everyone is buzzing with excitement. You've got a great idea for a theme, and you know a lot of your friends would support it. But when you go to vote, there's a problem. A teacher at the voting table says, "Oh, I'm sorry. Only students with plain black or plain blue backpacks are allowed to vote. Bright colored backpacks aren't on the approved list." You look around and you notice that some students with the right backpacks are already voting. Your backpack is red, so you are turned away. It doesn't feel fair, right? Just because of the color of your backpack, you are excluded from a decision that affects you? Imagine how frustrating it must have been for people in history who couldn't vote because of similar unfair restrictions on things like owning property, race, or even gender. So, once these people learned that they were allowed to vote, they still knew that they needed to learn the election day rules. So, here are some of the important ones. The polling hours. Did you know that polls usually open early in the morning and close in the evening? The exact hours do vary by state, but if you're in line when the polls close, you can still vote. There is an age requirement. Voters must be at least 18 years old on election day to cast their ballot. Registration. Now, most states require voters to register before election day. In Texas, that is the case. Some states, however, allow same-day registration, where you're allowed to register and vote on the same day. You do need an ID. Many states require voters to show an ID, like your driver's license or your state ID. Now, there are different voting methods, so depending on the state, people can vote in person, by mail, or even early, sometimes weeks before the election day. In Texas, we are able to vote 2 weeks early. Now, of course, polling sites must be accessible to everybody nowadays. They must include people with disabilities, and states often provide options for people who might need assistance voting from their homes. So, what about the future of voting? Could things change from the way they are? Well, sure. Change is inevitable. It's a process that we can't stop. Sometimes it's for the better and sometimes not so much. For example, just like in recent years, the way we voted has changed dramatically. New technology might even impact voting someday in a different way. In the future, we might vote online or maybe through an app on our smartphones. Who knows? Either way, voting is important because it gives citizens, that's you, a voice in decisions that impact their lives, from laws and policies to leadership choices. Here's why it's important. Voting helps decide what kinds of schools, parks, the laws that are created, the public services that we might have. So by voting, we get to influence the changes that we want to see, and those changes shapes our future. Voting is a powerful way to protect our freedoms and our rights. Leaders who are elected can make decisions about healthcare, education, and civil rights that will affect you and your life. Voting allows people to stand up for their beliefs and choose people or representatives who reflect their values and their priorities. Even a single vote can make a difference in close elections. It's our way of showing that every person's opinion matters in a democracy. By voting, citizens can take an active role in creating the kind of community and country that they want to live in. If you're interested in reading more about elections, shoot me an email with the subject line Election Day, and I'll send you a free copy of the articles and activities that accompany this podcast. If you're enjoying these stories of Texas history, you'll find even more to explore on michelleGauthor.com, where you'll find reading passages, engaging activities, and comprehension questions that pair perfectly with every episode. It's a way to keep the learning going and help your kids dive deeper into the stories they love. Thanks for listening, and remember, yesterday is today's history.